Hello there! Even if you just turned in, you'll probably not have a hard time figuring out that I love history. But what even long-time viewers might be unaware of, I also love dinosaurs. Always have, never grew out of it. And as it so happens, you can combine these topics. You see, the study of dinosaurs began in the 19th century when naturalists first became aware that fossils that had been found around the world belonged to long extinct gigantic creatures. Terrible lizards, as Richard Owen dubbed them. And before you type angry comments, yes, they are technically not extinct. Dinosaurs live on in the form of avian dinosaurs, or birds as we commonly call them. Keep the energy, however, because this video will be all about a dinosaur-induced angry squabble. Whew, that might have been the longest intro yet, and I still haven't properly set up what the episode is actually about. But don't worry about that now, just lean back and enjoy the tale of two egos clashing over bones. We'll begin our story with a meeting in Berlin in the winter of 1863. Our two protagonists are Edward Drinker Cope, which is a fantastic name, not gonna lie, and Othniel Charles Marsh, who fortunately went by Charles, so I don't have to pronounce that name again. Both were here for a scientific conference. The field of paleontology was still young, starting in the mid-18th century, though of course some older attempts at studying fossils existed. Cope and Marsh were both paleontologists, but both were very different in their approach. Cope was the adventurer type, spirited, though maybe a bit careless. Marsh, on the other hand, was very academic and methodical, perhaps a bit slow to come to conclusions. Nonetheless, the two got along splendidly. They exchanged addresses and voted to stay in touch. Both even named the species after each other. However, their differences would soon make them polite. Cope, a young man in his 20s from a wealthy family, had little time to study the books. He was a proponent of neo-Lamarckism, a theory of evolution that states that living beings have some degree of control over how they evolve. While this theory is nowadays mostly abandoned in favor of Darwinism, which states that mutations occur randomly and those with better random traits are more likely to survive and spread these traits, it was still very prevalent in the 19th century. Boy, that was a long sentence. It was, however, this theory of Darwin that Marsh supported. Marsh was only about 10 years older than Cope, yet he was an old soul, so to speak. He had no youthful naivete or energy in his body. The only thing the two really had in common, aside paleontology, was very big egos. It is almost surprising their first meeting was so amicable, yet this is probably what made their feud so heated. Had they had an instant disliking to each other, they'd probably just avoided each other and moved on. But instead, their fight would leave an impression on the entire field of study. The spark that started it all? A common visit to an excavation site in New Jersey that had previously yielded a lot of dinosaur fossils. The first we found in America, actually. Cope and Marsh went together, yet Cope clearly held the financial advantage, as well as being acquainted with the paleontologists that frequented here. To make up for it, Marsh bribed some of the pit operators to divert any fossil finds to him. Cope felt betrayed. He was the one who invited Marsh, and that is how he repaid his kindness? What he could not know was that Marsh was somewhat paranoid about his work and laurels being stolen. Taking a first look at any fossil probably felt like the natural course of action to him. The first cracks in their friendship appeared now, as they started to critique each other more harshly in their reviews of each other's works. While they continued to name species after each other, a new pattern emerges. Cope named a small amphibian after Marsh. Marsh retaliated by naming what he called a gigantic snake after Cope. Using his family connections, Cope moved to the western United States, where he suspected rich fossil deposits. In his typical manner, he took pictures with armed guards to dramatize the danger of his profession a bit. Some of his new employees were, however, originally on Marsh's payroll, which the latter took very harshly when he found out about the defectors. Then Cope made a big discovery, a large aquatic creature with with a small neck but immensely long tail. Proudly he showed it off to Marsh, which he invited in hopes of making him jealous. Marsh, however, dryly pointed out that he put the head on the wrong end of the creature. The neck was long and the tail was short. Much to Cope's chagrin, this was echoed by other peers. Cope was unfortunately known for errors in his work due to his impatient nature. This, however, was the biggest mistake he made so far, and he wouldn't let that grumpy walrus Marsh get away with it. These two reminded me of some other guys. Meanwhile, Marsh had moved to the west as well, to lay claim to many newly discovered dig sites. He also managed to involve the media in his excavations, quickly not only rising to prominence himself, but also getting more eyes than ever onto the field. That said, Cope's impassioned writing and speeches about dinosaurs also drew attention, even if less so than Marsh's media campaigns. Problematically, however, in their race to outdo each other, both men often ended up describing the same species, yet giving them different names. This is when other paleontologists started to get fed up with their feud. It no longer only affected them and their families, but the entire field. Yet their feud had even further repercussions as both men started to venture into territory held by the Sioux tribes. These lands were disputed between the natives and the United States government, but then gold was found in the territory. Of course, neither Cope nor Marsh were interested in it, but well-financed groups with excavation gear drew suspicions from all sides. Marsh even went so far to make political agreements with Chief Red Cloud of the Sioux to speak on his behalf with President Grant. This was just so he could gain access to the fossils before Cope, but in the end, both men were locked out of the area as tensions grew. It should be noted that Marsh was no friend to the natives and actively supported their expulsion from the land, just so he could search it for fossils. Cope was no better, admitting to robbing native graves in a letter. In 1877, both men were sent a message about a huge fossil belonging to a truly gigantic dinosaur. Both men rushed to lay claim to the remains. Marsh even got so paranoid at this point that he wrote letters to his friends only in code. I feel a lot of this could have been avoided if therapy was a thing back then, but that is true for much of history, I guess. Anyway, Cope ended up getting to this fossil first, while Marsh's nearby quarry collapsed, nearly killing his workers. Marsh's fortunes turned as he learned about the Como Bluffs, another nearby location rich with fossils. His very workers were given no time to rest and immediately had to set up a new dig site there. However, Cope learned of this and soon followed. Some of Marsh's men once again defected to Cope. Gee, I wonder why this keeps happening. In their obsessive rivalry, however, they were unable to prevent more paleontologists to discover the fossil-rich Como Bluffs, and soon the location was practically swarming with researchers. This mirrored their fate in the scientific world. Once the two top stars of the field, their petty fighting had lost both a lot of credibility, and they were sidelined for more professional researchers. A final attempt to fell Marsh was Cope's Journal of Misdeeds. Yes, he kept a book of grudges. With that, he attempted to sue Marsh for all sorts of things, like intellectual theft and mismanagement of public funds. Marsh retaliated with his own charges. None of these, however, really led to any sentences for either man. Not that it mattered, both were financially ruined by their constant excavations and poor health. Cope passed away in 1897, but in a final attempt to get at Marsh, he had his skull donated to science so it could be measured. He hoped Marsh would do the same and have the world find out his cranium was larger, which at the time was believed to be a sign of intelligence. Marsh never fell for the bait, however. That concludes the story of the Bone Wars. In the end, both men contributed a lot to paleontology, even if their methods became increasingly unorthodox. If it matters, Marsh's work was more diligent and thus still holds up a bit better today. However, their feud soured the reputation of the field both inside and outside America. At least it makes for a curious story, and that is what we are here for. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Once again, thank you to my wonderful artist and to you, viewers. If you will, leave a like, a comment, and subscribe. Until next time, bye! Seems like these two had a bone to pick with each other. Okay, I see myself out.